Chapter 2 Is Civil Society Bankable? Of Where Hope Takes Root. Annual Meeting of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Tashkent, Uzbekistan, May 5, 2003. It is a particular honor to have been invited to deliver the Jacques de la Rosière lecture to such a distinguished gathering. It is, I must admit, an honor that I accepted with considerable trepidation. My first reaction was to question whether I would have anything to say that would be of interest to the audience. Unlike those who have presented the La Rosière lecture in previous years, I am not an economist, a banker, or a specialist in national or international finance. But I have been involved in the field of development for nearly 4 decades. This engagement has been grounded in my responsibilities as Imam of the Shia Ismaili community and in Islam's message of the fundamental unity of Deen and Dunya, spirit and life. Throughout its long history, the Ismaili Imamate has emphasized the importance of activities that reflect the social conscience of Islam, that contribute to the well-being of Allah's greatest creation, humankind, and that reflect the responsibility Islam places on the fortunate and the strong to assist those less fortunate. When I became Imam in 1957, I was faced with developing a system to meet my responsibilities in an organized, sustainable manner that was suited to the circumstances, demands, and opportunities of the second half of the 20th century. In a period of decolonization in Asia and Africa, the Cold War and its disastrous impact on developing countries, the painful progress toward a global movement for international development, it became essential that the Imamate's economic and social development efforts be broadened beyond the Ismaili community to the societies in which the community lived. Presently, the Ismaili community of approximately 15 million resides in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and North America. This aim led me to establish what is now the Aga Khan Development Network, AKDN, a group of agencies with individual mandates to engage in critical dimensions of development from distinct yet complementary perspectives and the competencies these dimensions require. The network is active in the fields of health, education, civil society enhancement, culture and economic and rural development. It now has more than 3 decades of experience working in South Asia and Eastern and Western Africa, and since 1993 has been active in Central Asia. This work started in Tajikistan with humanitarian assistance and then post-conflict reconstruction and redevelopment, and it has expanded to other countries, including Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan more recently. The network's newest engagement is a major commitment to reconstruction and development in Afghanistan. Time and experience have taught us a number of lessons that you may already know, but that explain why our development agencies are structured in number and purpose as they are. Development is a multifaceted process that requires approaches from multiple perspectives and competencies, necessitates local communities or beneficiaries to mobilize and develop the capacity to take responsibility for activities designed to produce sustained results, and requires long-term engagement with programs developing into permanent and localized institutions. The structure and operating principles of the network are a response to this understanding of development. These agencies are field-based with a small headquarters staff and draw on the energies of more than 20,000 employees and volunteers. The long-term perspective and the field-driven experience of the AKDN will be the basis of my remarks this afternoon. I am sure we can agree that at the most general level, the goal of all development efforts, be they promoted by governments, national organizations, or international development agencies and institutions, is to stimulate and facilitate change that is positive in character, significant in impact, long-lasting in consequence, and sustainable into the future. The more complex and difficult question is, what does it take to achieve development that meets this aspiration? Economic development, increasing the production and consumption of goods and services in the economy, and expanding and improving the quality of employment opportunities for a country's population and its disposable income, is certainly critical. I take this goal as a given, and that is why the Agahan Development Network has several agencies whose primary objective is to expand economic opportunity in selected sectors. However, the quality of life does not clearly have a direct one-to-one relationship with the level of production or even the breadth of access of what an economy produces. Without doubt, growth plays a central role in increasing human welfare and dignity, but other dimensions and challenges to development play at least an equally important role. Unfortunately, many of them are not easily measured in conventional economic terms, nor addressed through usual economic programs and policies. It is to these aspects of development that I would like to devote most of the rest of my remarks for two reasons. The non-economic dimensions of development often escape the attention they deserve because the degree of risk of not doing something is often underestimated. Secondly, when dealt with competently and over time, these non-economic dimensions actually support and sustain the health of the economy as well as other aspects of society. From the perspective of 40 years of work and the experience of the agencies of the Agahan Development Network, institutional development stands out as critically important to broad-based sustainable change. By institutional development, I mean the strengthening and refocusing of existing institutions as well as the creation of new institutions and policies to support them. Because this process takes time, it is also urgent. Institutional development is essential to respond to emergent needs, new opportunities, and persistent gaps if change is to measure up to the standard of being positive, significant, long-lasting, and sustainable, and having a genuinely measurable impact. No country, to my knowledge, can achieve stable, continuous growth of its civil society if its civil society is constrained by inherent institutional instability. The need is universal. It exists in big countries and small countries well endowed with natural resources and those that have less, countries in the developing world and the developed world, including those in transition following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The need for institutional development also applies to every sector of society, to government at all levels, to business, large and small, and to that diverse array of informal and formal organizations that have come to be referred to collectively as civil society institutions. One clear lesson of the last half of the 20th century is that governments cannot do everything. The role of the private business sectors in national economies is now universally acknowledged as both critical and legitimate. But the importance of refocusing existing institutions and developing new ones to enter spheres of social activity previously undertaken solely by government is not yet as widely recognized. Nor is there a clear understanding of what form new institutions might take or how they should relate to government, an issue that is at least being addressed with respect to government's relations with the private business sector, as opposed to the private social sector. In the latter, lack of clarity, even confusion, dominates the field. What do I mean when I speak of civil society institutions? Of the three sectors, government, private business, and civil society, it is the most diverse and the least well understood. Moreover, I'm not sure that even those who work in the sector define it in the same way. My purpose is not to enter into an academic discussion, but only to ensure that I am understood. I prefer to think of civil society in the widest sense, including all sorts of organizations and initiatives. It includes much more than is captured by the term NGO. I would, for instance, include professional organizations that aim to uphold best practices or that serve and contribute to a vibrant and effective business sector, such as chambers of commerce, associations of accountants, bankers, doctors, lawyers, and the like. Civil society organizations are generally non-profit or not-for-profit, at least implicitly. They may, however, generate money from fees or services that they provide. This characteristic is the source of great confusion in many parts of the world because non-profit is frequently confused with charity, giving service or sustenance to the needy. The confusion is understandable because charity has a long history in all religious traditions and it renders real assistance to those not able to help themselves. Some civil society institutions should and will always be involved in charity, but those of a new type exist to provide services in return for fees that will cover some or all of the costs of operations, including salaries, but not produce a profit for owners or investors. Perhaps non-commercial conveys the purpose and operating principles of civil society institutions in many parts of the world more clearly than the term non-profit. Because most civil society institutions are non-commercial, and whatever dividends they produce contribute directly to improving the quality of life of their beneficiaries, these institutions face the fundamental problem of identifying financial resources that will keep them alive and enable them to grow. At the least of the issue is the question, is civil society bankable? If so, what criteria should apply? The long history of the Acadian agencies has shown that although numerous financial institutions and programs are available to support economic investment, non-commercial civil society institutions face the permanent threat of being systematically underfunded. One of the causes, at least from the experience of AKDN, is that civil society institutions are rarely, if ever, part of a national planning process. Relations between public sector and private sector health or education delivery, for example, are more often left to chance than being a thought-through process driven by clear development goals. Within the civil society sector, there is not even consultation among the providers working on the same problems from different perspectives as to how they might work together for better effectiveness. In addition, financial institutions find it difficult to rationalize the role, needs, and futures of civil society institutions within the national economy. At least in the banking sector, these institutions cannot tailor their financial support systems when available to the characteristics of non-commercial civil society institutions. A number of these characteristics are common, such as the need and desire for longevity, the incapability to plan growth on the basis of secure long-term funding, the need to employ competent people at fair market rates, and in some cases the inability or unwillingness to become a commercial venture. I would like to share with you some specific examples from our own activities in this region. How does a private sector hospital that has chosen not to offer its services for commercial gain fund its expansion or the cost of increasingly expensive, sophisticated technical equipment? How does a private university fund its expansion into new areas of higher education when student fees will never reasonably cover more than 25% of the cost of running the university? How do you address the now well-recognized problem of pockets of poverty in developing countries that clearly present a real threat of destabilization, but that have no hope of seeing improved economic standards until a key piece of unbankable infrastructure is built? A good example is the recently constructed bridge linking Tajik Badakhshan and Afghan Badakhshan, which could never be justified on the basis of normal banking criteria. Within civil society in much of the developing world, some professions are critical to stable growth and to democracy, but are systematically under-resourced in terms of pay and opportunities for ongoing training. The three groups I will cite today are teachers, nurses, and journalists. The economic status of these professions simply has to be corrected if the consequences are not going to be the progressive degradation of education, the progressive degradation of healthcare, and the deterioration of the national media, which will be left incompetent or open to all sorts of undesirable pressures, including corruption. And yet, the additional cost of better remuneration to such professions will simply add to the end cost of the product, making it even more inaccessible to those who need it most, the poor. In the developing world, the backlog of unmet existing needs, combined with the need of rapidly growing populations, puts incredible pressures on even the most forward-looking, well-resourced and efficient governments. In the countries of the former Soviet Union, the previously high levels of achievement in health and all levels of education are no longer sustainable because governments cannot provide the same levels of subsidies. And in all parts of the world, the growing differentiation and specialization in the fields of health and higher education demand institutions of a new type, mastery of new areas of knowledge and technology, the capacity to innovate, and the identification of new source of funding. Not even the governments of the richest countries in the world can meet these challenges without contributions from the private business and civil society sectors. Civil society organizations need to reach for the highest level of competence to justify their support. The sector combines energy and creativity with a social conscience. Together, these constitute a powerful impulse and should be nurtured. At the same time, capacities for program design and implementation, fundraising, and self-study and evaluation need to be strengthened. Learning from experience of the sector is important for the organizations themselves, as well as the government, international development agencies, universities, and even the private business sector. How can we improve the process of self-analysis and evaluation and the exchange of experiences without diminishing the autonomy and creative initiative of civil society institutions? How can they learn from their own experiences in order to improve the management of their programs? The network's experience also reveals that the civil society sector faces a number of challenges that must be addressed if the sector is going to make an effective, continuing contribution to national development in this region. Even when needs are readily evident, the sector's role and potential are not well understood. Critics question its legitimacy, and no framework, no predictable and reliable environment exists in which civil society organizations can function and prosper. To whom and for what the sector is responsible and accountable are often unclear, and few appreciate how the sector is and can be financial and sustained. How should these civil society institutions be governed? What standards should be applied to define their success? Governments, donor agencies, and others need to do more to create an environment that enables civil society institutions to emerge and develop. These basic issues is now to improve mutual understanding and to create the conditions of confidence and mutual predictability that will enable people and institutions to realize their full potential. Some larger contextual issues are critical as well. The first of these is regional cooperation, a subject that has been mentioned at various points in the program over the last 2 days, although primarily in terms of its economic consequences. The last few years have seen the emergence of groups of neighboring countries coming together to promote trade and broader economic relations. This movement is critically important for Central Asia as well as it can build on the demography of region and elements of common culture that have developed over extended periods of time as symbolized by the Silk Road. Central Asia is still well situated to play an important role between Europe, China, and Indian subcontinent. That role will be more important and have greater impact if the countries of the region can find ways to develop their economies and resources on a cooperative basis rather than as individual nations. But why restrict this cooperation to the commercial domain? Many civil society needs are clearly regional. Hence, our creation of the University of Central Asia in partnership with the governments of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyz Republic to provide regional education specialized in high mountains studies. Pluralism is the recognition that people of diverse backgrounds and interests, organizations, and projects of different types and different kinds and forms of creative expression are all valuable and therefore deserving of recognition and support by government and society as a whole. Without support for pluralism, civil society does not function. Pluralism is also essential for peace, a statement that is unfortunately documented by armed conflict in context of cultural, ethnic, or religious differences on almost every continent at this time. It is of particular importance here in Central Asia, given the demography of most countries. The purpose of my comments today is not to point an accusing finger at international or national banking systems, nor do I want to appear ungrateful for the generous assistance we have received from our donor partners over the last many years. I do want to share with you, however, my deep conviction, drawn from years of experience, that financial support systems for non-commercial civil society institutions do not exist in certain countries, are insufficient, or are ill-adapted to the needs of such institutions. If the international financial community is willing to look in depth at the problems to be addressed in supporting non-commercial civil society institutions, some strategic goals should be set. The first one I would propose to you is to ensure that as civil society grows, it does so in a manner that enhances public appreciation of the diversity of people within common frontiers as an asset, not a liability. Events in the recent years in Eastern Europe, in Great Lakes area of Africa, and in numerous countries in Asia, including Afghanistan and Tajikistan, have shown that these societies must develop in such a way that each group within them feels valued and respected and is encouraged to contribute to the goal of national development. I do not believe that most people are born into an environment where they see pluralism as an asset. However, I am convinced that civil society institutions have a central role to play in bringing value to pluralism and inclusiveness. But again, who will fund the tools with which pluralism will find its way into civil society as a central necessity for civilized life in the future? Thank you for hearing me out. I was not invited here to speak to you about banking, although I clearly understand and admire the purpose of the EBRD, which is development through economic stimulation. Creating a sound future for the people of Central Asia requires just as much, in my view, a clear focus on building new concepts and new institutions for new civil societies. That's the end of chapter 2.